Hi everybody, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to chat with you about high acid versus low acid foods. So like most days this time of year, I am in my kitchen, and this morning my husband and I are going to be pressure canning some chickpea tomatillo hash, and it's actually one of the main reasons why we grow tomatillos. And so I'm just going to putter away in the kitchen and chat with you guys about high acid versus low acid. So when we are canning food, it's really important to understand the pH level of the food that we're working with and know which method is appropriate for preservation. So low acid foods are anything that is a 4.6 on the pH scale and higher. This means that the food themselves inherently do not have a lot of acid in them. Whereas when we work with high acid foods, and most people when they start canning get started with this kind of stuff, this is like our jams, our chutneys, our pickles. In this case, either the food itself has a high enough amount of acid, so fruit is very common with this one, or we're adding enough acid medium to the food that it brings the pH to an acidic point. So this would be, for example, pickles, right? Pickling cucumbers themselves are actually a low acid food, but because we add vinegar to the recipe, we are increasing the acid level and thereby making it safe for water bath canning. So that's the next thing I want to chat with you about. When we have high acid foods, they are perfectly safe to be water bath canned. And if anyone's ever done water bath canning before, it's exactly what it sounds like. You prepare the food according to the recipe, you put it in your canner, make sure it's covered with at least 1 or 2 inches of water, bring it to a boil, and you leave it in there for the designated amount of time. And this is a perfectly safe canning method for high acid foods because much of the bacteria that we're worried about, things like botulism and that kind of stuff, can't really grow in a high acid environment. So the temperature of the boiling water is sufficient enough to kill off any other microbes, and then of course hermetically seal the jars, which is what we're doing when we're canning. That's something else I really like to point out to people as well, is that this is very much a science, it's not an art. If you're looking into cooking and adding a pinch of this and a dash of that and a little bit of flair, canning is not for you. Canning, you do have to follow canning safe recipes, and you can't really tinker with them that much. So it's really important to understand that you're following canning safe recipes. But like I say, in high acid foods, that temperature that the water reaches is sufficient enough to hermetically seal the jars, which is why we can, and to kill off any microbes and bacteria. But what do we do when we have low acid foods? These would be things like if we wanted to can meat, or if we wanted to can vegetables in water and we didn't want to pickle them. This, of course, again, is a pH of 4.6 or higher, and water bath canning doesn't cut it. The reason for this is it doesn't matter how long you boil that water for. It is physically impossible for the temperature to reach a high enough point that it's going to kill off botulism, which is the main one we're concerned about. And I'm just going to double check in my book here, but I believe, yes. So we need foods to be heated to 116 degrees Celsius or 240 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's impossible with water bath canning. You can boil and boil and boil until the pigs come home or the cows come home, I think, as it were. And that temperature is never going to get high enough in a water bath canner. So that's why it's really important that we pressure can those foods, because the pressure canner itself can reach those temperatures that we need. So our tomatillos and garlic are out of the oven. So I'm going to scoop all this and put it into the food processor. For those who are interested in the book that I'm following for this, this is the complete guide to pressure canning, and I'll make sure that I post that below as well. So I just wanted to talk about, I wanted to use this particular vegetable, fruit, as an example in terms of high acid versus low acid. So because this recipe is adding chickpeas to it, this automatically tips it. As soon as you put a legume or a bean, in any kind of recipe, it automatically tips it to a low acid. But you can use tomatillos to make salsa verde. I'm sure many of you have done that before. And then you'll add in a little bit of lemon juice, a little bit of vinegar, and that's gonna bump that acidity up just enough so that you can water bath can it. So another quick point I want to make is that if you ever see a canning recipe and it calls for adding an acid medium, either a vinegar or a lemon juice, even a lime juice, you cannot skip that. The reason it's being added into the recipe is to bump the pH level up so that way you can safely water bath can it. If you skip adding that step, then your pH level won't be high enough. Something else to consider is that these recipes are always going to ask you to use bottled lemon juice or bottled lime juice or bottled vinegar. And the reason for that is because these have a very specific acid ratio when you purchase them. Whereas a lemon, if freshly squeezed lemon juice, might not have the same acid level as bottled lemon juice. So that's why they call for that. If you folks are interested, if I've got some people watching this today that are brand new to canning but want to add this to their tool belt, I'm also going to link a webinar that I did below because I did that about a month and a half ago. The recording is available on my website and it covers all canning basics from A to Z. So that might be a great resource for you. So we have our chickpea tomatillo hash all bottled up and in the pressure canner, and my canner is just about to finish venting steam. Has to vent steam for about 10 minutes before you put your weighted gauge. So I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about canning equipment with you guys, because when it comes to water bath canning, it's actually pretty easy to do a DIY kind of method, but there it goes. So I'm fully vented and now I'm gonna put on my canning weight. There we are. So when it comes to canning equipment, if you're going to be doing water bath canning, you can actually DIY it pretty easy. It's really just a stock pot, and lots of people will make their own canning racks by connecting a bunch of canning rings together. You just want to make sure your jars aren't on the bottom. So it's pretty easy to do that when it comes to water bath canning, but when it comes to pressure canning, you really need a pressure canner. There's no substitute in terms of equipment. And a pressure cooker and an Instant Pot, which is also a pressure cooker, will not work for canning. So like I said, I've got myself a Presto here. This one has served my family's needs for a very long time. If I do a single layer, I can fit 9 jars in, which means you can fit up to 18 jars if you do a double layer. Now, I'm sure I'm gonna get a couple people comments, so I'm gonna mention this right now. I'm pressure canning on an induction stove or a glass top stove. And a lot of pressure canners are going to say that this is a no-no when it comes to that. But there's a few things I want you to consider with induction stoves and pressure canning. So first, one of the main reasons they talk about it not being safe with an induction stove is because of the weight of the canner. This is very much to take into consideration if, say, if you get like an all-American canner, if anyone's ever worked with one of those things are a beast. You fill those with the water and your jars, and you're likely to crack your glass top. So that's one of the main reasons why they say to avoid using pressure canning on an induction stove. It has to do with the weight of the canner. So I never do 2 layers in mine, just in case. You know, I would rather it take twice as long to get through canning than to break my stove. That would really suck. Another thing to take into consideration is some canners will have a concave bottom to them. Any of you guys have one of like a pot that once it starts getting really hot and starts to wobble on the stove? That's exactly what would happen if you tried to use a pressure canner that had a concave bottom on an induction stove. So those are the 2 main reasons why you wouldn't want to use your pressure canner on an induction stove. Just check your manual and you've got no problems at all. So this is slowly starting to move up. We need 10 pounds of pressure for this. And then it'll be pressure canning for 1 hour and 15 minutes, which is a long time, but well worth the effort. So I hope you enjoyed today's video on a brief introduction between low acid and high acid foods, what kind of equipment you need, and the different processes and why you need them. If you are brand new to canning and you want some additional information, I did do a Canning 101 webinar not too long ago, and it's still available on my website. The recording there will be available to you as long as YouTube exists. So it might be worth the investment for you. If you have any questions about high acid versus low acid, you can definitely leave those below. And until next time, this is Correne from Spirea Herbs, wishing you health, wellness, and happy canning.